Imagine seeing a rooster that looks like a hen. He's male. He crows like a rooster. He has the anatomy of a rooster. But when you look at his feathers, something immediately stands out. Instead of the long, pointed hackle and saddle feathers normally associated with a mature rooster, he has short, rounded, hen-like feathers. This unusual bird is commonly known among breeders as a henny or henny. But here's where the mystery begins. What causes a male chicken to develop female-type feathers? And more importantly, if you have a henny, what kind of breeding strategy can actually help preserve that unusual trait? Is there a secret cross, a particular bloodline, or is the answer hidden in genetics? Today, we're going to find out. Welcome back to ChickenMatterTalks, the channel where we explore the history, genetics, bloodlines, and fascinating traits found in chickens and gamefowl breeding. Before we begin, I need your help. If you enjoy educational stories and documentaries like this, hit the like button and subscribe to ChickenMatterTalks. Every like and subscribe tells us that you want more content about bloodline history, genetics, breeding, and poultry heritage. And if this video reaches 1,000 likes and we continue growing towards 1,000 new subscribers, it will tell us that you want to see even more documentaries like this. So if you've ever wondered why a male chicken can grow feathers that look completely different from a normal rooster, stay with me, because the genetics behind the henny are more fascinating than they might appear. Let's begin. What exactly is a henny? First, let's clear up one important misconception. A henny is not necessarily a separate breed. The term generally describes a male chicken that expresses hen-feathering. In other words, the bird is male, but its plumage develops a distinctly female-like appearance. The hackle feathers can remain short and rounded. The saddle feathers can also have the rounded appearance normally associated with hens. And that's what makes the henny so visually unusual. You can look at the bird, and the feathers may make you think you're looking at a female, but biologically, you're looking at a male. This distinction is important because henny describes a trait or phenotype rather than automatically identifying a particular bloodline. Different breeding families can potentially display unusual feathering traits, so the name alone doesn't tell us the complete ancestry of the bird. And that brings us to the real story, genetics. Why does a male grow hen feathers? So, what actually causes this? Hen feathering is associated with genetic differences in the way sex hormones are processed in the bird's tissues. Research into hen-feathered chickens has linked the phenotype to increased activity of the enzyme aromatase. Aromatase is involved in converting certain androgens into estrogens. In birds carrying the relevant genetic mechanism, increased aromatase activity in feather follicles can influence how the feathers develop, and the result, a male chicken can develop female-type plumage. That's the fascinating part. The bird doesn't simply become female. Instead, the feather follicles respond differently to the hormonal environment. So what we're seeing on the outside is actually the visible result of a much deeper interaction between genes, hormones, and feather development. The trait and its inheritance. Now we reach the question breeders are most interested in. Can a henny produce another henny? This is where we need to be careful. You may hear people describe hen feathering as simply recessive, but the inheritance is more nuanced than saying one simple rule applies to every henny breeding family. Research on classic hen-feathered chickens has identified a genetic mechanism associated with an autosomal factor, with the visible phenotype primarily expressed in males. That means the genetics carried by both parents can matter, and this is exactly why breeding records are so important. A henny male may carry genetic information associated with the trait, but that doesn't mean every son will automatically become hen-feathered. The female side of the pedigree matters too. The specific genetic background matters, and the way the parents are bred together matters. So when someone says, just cross a henny with this particular bird and you'll always get hennies, be careful. Genetics rarely works that simply.
So what is the best cross? Now we can finally return to our title. Best cross for henny gamefowl. What actually works? Here's the most important point. There isn't a universally proven cross that guarantees henny offspring. Instead, breeders interested in preserving a genetic trait may use different strategies depending on their objectives and the genetic information available to them. One strategy that is often discussed in genetics is backcrossing. A backcross means breeding an offspring back to one of its parents or to a genetically similar parental line. Why would someone do this? Because it can increase the proportion of genetic material coming from a desired parent or family. However, backcrossing does not magically guarantee that every offspring will express the desired trait. The relevant genes still have to be inherited in the appropriate combination. That's why the offspring must be observed and documented. Why line breeding may matter. Another concept we need to understand is line breeding. Line breeding is a form of selective breeding designed to maintain a relationship to a particular family while attempting to preserve desirable characteristics. For someone studying Henny genetics, the objective wouldn't simply be make as many Hennies as possible. A responsible breeding objective would be much more precise. For example, can the hen-feathering trait be maintained? Does it appear consistently? Which parental combinations produce it? And what happens when those offspring are bred in subsequent generations? These questions turn breeding into a process of observation rather than guesswork. Why a famous bloodline doesn't guarantee a Henny. Here's another important misconception. Some people may assume that crossing a Henny with a famous bloodline automatically produces a better or more reliable Henny. But a famous name doesn't guarantee genetic compatibility. The important thing is the actual genetics of the individual birds. A breeder could have two birds carrying the same general bloodline name, yet their individual genetic backgrounds could be very different. That's why pedigree matters. If the goal is to study or preserve hen-feathering, the breeder should know as much as possible about the male's ancestry, the female's ancestry, which parents carried the trait, which offspring expressed the trait, and how consistently the trait appears across generations. Without those records, it's very difficult to know whether a particular cross is actually working.
Did you know? Here's something fascinating. Hen-feathering isn't unique to one modern breeding program. Certain chicken breeds have been studied for generations because their males naturally display hen-feathered plumage. The Sebright, for example, is a famous breed in which males and females have similar feathering. Scientific research into such chickens has helped researchers understand how genes, hormones, and feather follicles interact. So the Henny isn't simply an odd-looking rooster. It's also an interesting example of genetic regulation of sexual plumage. How do you know if a cross actually worked? This may be the most important lesson of the entire video. Don't judge a cross from one bird. Don't judge it from one generation, and don't judge it simply because the offspring looks impressive. Instead, record the results. Which offspring showed the hen-feathering trait? Which didn't? What were the parents? What was their pedigree? What happened when selected offspring were bred again? Over several generations, patterns can begin to emerge, and that's when a breeder can start distinguishing between a repeatable genetic pattern and a one-time result. So, what is the best cross for a Henny gamefowl? The answer isn't simply a bloodline name, it's not a magic formula, and it's certainly not a guarantee. The real answer is understanding the genetics behind the trait. A Henny is a male bird displaying hen-feathered plumage. That unusual appearance is connected to genetic and hormonal mechanisms affecting feather development. And because the trait can be inherited, breeders interested in preserving it need to think in terms of pedigree, inheritance, selection, and multiple generations. The most important lesson is this: don't chase a famous cross. Understand the genetics first. Because when you understand the genetics, you can make better breeding decisions. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to ChickenMatterTalks. And now I'm curious, have you ever seen a true Henny male in person? And if you've ever observed the hen-feathering trait appearing in offspring, share what you've learned in the comments. Let's keep the discussion respectful, educational, and focused on understanding poultry genetics. Thank you for watching another documentary from ChickenMatterTalks. Here, we don't just look at what we see on the outside. We try to understand the genetics behind it, because sometimes the most unusual-looking birds can teach us some of the most fascinating lessons in biology. Until the next documentary, keep learning, keep observing, and keep discovering the science behind the birds we raise. I'll see you in the next one.